Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Overtime Podcast, a Cold Front Report multicast. I'm one of the two co-hosts, Clayton Garrett. You can find me on Twitter at CFR Clayton, and joining me as always,
I am Jeff Uvino. You can find me on Twitter at RealJUVEINO.
Well, the Bills came out there this past week, and they managed to get the win over the Los Angeles Chargers. First and foremost, Jeff, what were your initial thoughts
on this week's win for the Bills?
Well, the Bills defense got right this week, and it stepped up when it needed to. Josh Allen and the Bills offense played well in the first half, but it was Buffalo defense that won this game. They stepped up big when they needed to in the fourth quarter. Bills turned the ball over 3 times on 7 plays, and the Chargers get all of the momentum that they could possibly have out of that. But the Buffalo defense makes stands. They get helped a little bit by some poor decisions by Anthony Lynn and the Chargers, but really impressive fourth quarter from the Bills defense, and they were able to find a way to win the game.
Oh my goodness, it was pretty bad from Anthony Lynn this week, to say the least. That was as disorganized as I have ever seen a professional football team. Really, I mean, it's fairly evident that he learned all the things in terms of organization as a head coach from his predecessor, that being Rex Ryan. Maybe not predecessor in Los Angeles. You get what I mean. He comes from the Rex Ryan coaching tree, and it's pretty obvious. But no, like you said, the 3 turnovers in 7 plays, that was really that's a point in a game where a team can really things can get out of hand pretty quickly in a scenario like that. And I thought that the Bills handled their situation very well on the defensive side of the ball. I believe 2 of those one of those possessions at least ended in a turnover for the Bills defense. And the defense really was, I wouldn't say they were the backbone in this game, but they're really what kind of kept this game together as this Bills offense. It was pretty obvious that the rushing attack was the focal point for the Bills offense this week. So let's get into that. The Bills rushing attack, as we said, going into the bye week, that one of the biggest things that Jeff Uvino and I wanted to see from this team coming out of the bye week was the ability to establish themselves on the ground. As you see here, Zach Moss with 6.6 yards per carry and Devin Singletary at 7.5 yards per carry. Both these guys having over 6.5 yards per carry. That's a pretty good day for both of these running backs. What'd you think of the Bills' rushing attack here against the Chargers?
Well, they had it working in the first half, and really hit Los Angeles with a lot of different looks. I thought that the play calling was good in the first half. I've said in previous weeks, the Bills, if they can get up to that 5 yards per carry in the rushing game, they're more likely than not going to win the game, and they were at 5.7 this week. I thought Brian Daboll had some good stuff called in the first half. I thought that the double pass was called at the perfect time, the Beasley pass touchdown. And I also liked how coming out of the second half, they made a noticeable effort to get Stefon Diggs the ball. Your best playmaker doesn't touch the ball in the first half, so you come out in the second half and you make a conscious effort, a noticeable effort to get him the ball and make sure that he's getting it. And I thought that was really nice play calling. Josh Allen's fourth quarter was really discouraging, but games like that are going to happen, and the Bills are lucky that their defense is playing like it is right now, or they may have lost the game. But as far as the running game, I mean, I thought that Moss and Singletary both looked good, and that can be attributed to the Bills' offensive line. Both had multiple big plays on the ground. And like I said, that 5.7 yards per carry is really a key stat. The Chargers ran it for 3.2 yards per carry on the ground. I know that those numbers can get skewed a little bit by runs of 20 and 30 yards, but that's really an important stat for Buffalo. If they've been up above 5.0 yards per carry this season, then they've been much more successful than the other way around.
Yeah, this offense is firing in all cylinders when the rushing attack is working in synergy with the passing attack. And you can't really say that was the case this week. I'll pull up Allen's stats right here in a second. It wasn't really the case. They weren't really passing the ball that much this week. As you see, 24 attempts for Allen. And I mean, that's nothing compared to some weeks, but I'll talk about Josh Allen here in a second. But part of the reason why this Bills rushing attack was able to kind of find itself and get back in gear was the return of Mitch Morse playing center, and also the availability of having John Feliciano move over to one of the interior offensive line spots. This was the first time that we were able to see that I wouldn't say the complete offensive line, because the Bills lost Cody Ford last week as they put him on injured reserve. So you did have Brian Winters at right guard, and I'll talk about Brian Winters in a second. But having Deion Dawkins and then John Feliciano and then Mitch Morse, that is a big part in why this Bills rushing attack really kind of got in gear against what I believe to be a talented front for the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, you're talking about players like Jerry Tillery, who was a first-round pick, Linval Joseph, who a veteran in this league and has made a name for himself in Minnesota before going to Los Angeles. And then, of course, Joey Bosa, who had himself a day against the Bills, and they were without Melvin Ingram in this game. And that was a huge part of the matchup for the Bills facing up against this Chargers defense. And I said that last week, was having both Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram in this game, and they didn't. But the Bills rushing attack, I was really happy to see Devin Singletary and Zach Moss get their fair share of the workload this week. This was really only the second time this season we've seen both these backs used throughout the whole game, and really that being the focal point of their offense. I mean, you can't really say that's necessarily a bad thing. The passing offense has been lighting it up all season, but we stressed this coming out of the bye, or going into the bye, I should say, that being a one-dimensional football team is not a good thing to be going towards the playoffs. And these last 5 weeks, considering the passing offense was firing on all cylinders the first 10 games of the season, the first 12 games of the season, these last 5 games, it's crucial that this rushing attack can look as it did against the Chargers. So it's certainly promising, and it shows a lot of potential, I would say, in this Bills rushing attack to only get better. Because having these two backs like this at this time of the year with only 5 games left in the regular season is huge, because they both have fresh legs. They barely used them all season up until this point. So it's not like these guys are wore down. It's not like Devin Singletary and Zach Moss are nicked up or beat up at this point in the season. Going into meaningful football months, both of your young running backs who can carry a workload for the whole offense, let alone if they're splitting the carries. Both of these young running backs have plenty of gas in the tank to take you these last 5 games, and potentially for a deep playoff run as well.
Yeah, I thought that in what the Bills' offensive line struggled in pass protection, they made up for in the running game. We know how hard of an assignment Joey Bosa is for offensive tackles, and that showed on Sunday. I'm not putting blame on people for that. He's just a tremendous player. But I thought that, the Bills' offensive line did struggle to slow down the pass rush of the Chargers, and that impacted Josh Allen some, but they really made up for it in the rushing game, getting big pushes. I mean, there were a lot of times where Zach Moss and Devin Singletary had huge holes to run through, and they were getting to the second level with no problem. And that was really nice to see. A game where Josh Allen only threw for about 150 yards. I'm not sure the exact number, to make up for it in the run game, because you needed to, and the offense did enough to win the game in an off week. I'd say this was an off week for the Bills offense.
Well, so let's talk about Josh Allen's game. 18 for 24, 75% completion percentage, as you touched on, just over 150 yards, 157, and 2 total touchdowns with the 1 interception. A lot of people are kind of indifferent on how Allen played this week, on his overall performance. Now, I'll touch on my thoughts, but what were your thoughts on how Josh Allen played this week? And at the end of your analysis, why don't you give him a letter grade, A through F?
Yep. So the fourth quarter was horrible. We know that he turned the ball over twice. The interception was a ball that he should have never thrown. And I felt that as the season's gone along, he's almost tried those balls more. He's almost gotten more confident in the ability of Stephon Diggs to be able to go up and catch the ball, because let's face it, more times than not, Diggs does come down with balls like that where Allen just heaves it up for him. But this was an example of a pass that shouldn't have been thrown. We all know that. We can all agree on that. The fumble, it's easy to say he should have just fallen on it instead of trying to pick the ball up. But the fourth quarter was really bad. But looking at his statistics, 18 for 24, that's 75%. That's still a really good completion percentage. And him only attempting 24 passes shows you that, first of all, the run game was working. Their offense was, they had the lack of even pass attempts because the rushing game was working so well, and it was complementing the passing game. And so you take away the fourth quarter, and Josh Allen had a real nice game. And the thing is, though, people need to realize with a young quarterback quarters like this are going to happen. We're not even talking about an entire game. He came out of this game. He played really, really bad at the end, but he still completed 75% of his passes. He had the rush touchdown and he had the pass touchdown. Mistakes are going to happen, but that's why I'm so uplifted by the performance of the Bills defense this week, because your young quarterback is going to have moments in games like this where he struggles. It's going to happen. And he got picked up by his defense. And Josh Allen will be the first person to tell you that. You take away the fourth quarter, and I think he has a nice game. If he, he continues to hand the ball off, maybe run it some himself, I think his passing yards would have gotten closer up to 200 if he played in the fourth quarter like he did in the first three, especially in the first half. I'm going to give Allen a C. Some people might think that's a little too generous towards him, but I look at the completion percentage and I look at how they came out and they still put points on the board. They scored 27 points. A lot of that can be attributed to the rushing game, but Allen is also a part of the rushing game himself. He had a rushing touchdown himself. I'm not exactly sure how many rushing yards he had, but he's a factor in the rushing game, whether it's plays that are designed to run to him or not. And so I think a C is very average game. That the fact that our expectations for Allen have gotten to be upwards of 300 passing yards in that area, more touchdowns, not the turnovers. I think that is what is kind of making this seem maybe worse than it was.
I honestly, that fumbled snap was addressed after the game by setter Mitch Morse, and he said he was just as much to blame as Josh was. So I'm not going to say it doesn't count as a turnover, but there's multiple reasons as to why things happen. And one of the largest reasons that I believe Josh Allen lurked certain ways at certain points in this game this week, I don't know, he kind of fell back into his old tendencies of sometimes playing hero ball. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, really. I feel like kind of in a reduced role when he was given opportunities with the football in his hands, like a perfect example on a zone read when he ripped the ball out of Zach Moss's stomach when it was pretty obvious that he probably shouldn't, as he got stuffed at the line of scrimmage by two defensive tackles. So he yanks the ball out of Zach Moss's hands when he probably should have handed it off. We all saw that heave that you spoke of on the interception, as well as the drop snap, that both plays leading to turnovers. All instances are kind of Josh Allen being reckless with the football, Josh Allen being reckless with decision-making, Josh Allen, these things about Josh Allen, they are the bittersweet parts of his game, because while he'll light it up when he is asked to, like we've seen this season, I mean, that's no longer a concern of mine. If this is 2019 and we see a game from Josh Allen like this, I'm a little more concerned than I am right now, considering we've seen I wouldn't say a whole season, but 3/4 of a season almost of a body of work of Josh Allen being capable of working in this offense, the Bills being a pass-heavy offense. That's making me feel better more so than anything right now. Because if this were a game from last year, oh my goodness, I'd be pulling my hair out. Because Josh, like you said, he just simply did not look good in this game. And I'm going to agree with you along the lines of a letter grade. I'm going to give him a C+, which, some people might consider that generous. I don't really consider it generous. I consider that's what he earned. That's a deserving grade. And the matter of fact is Josh Allen wasn't asked to do much in this game this week. And in limited opportunities, it seemed like he tried to do too much. And I felt like that's what led to those instances where he tried to play hero ball. And like you said, he'd be the first person to admit that those are things that you can't do in a football game. And he was the first person to say that. And, Josh Allen's never going to say the wrong thing. But it's a matter of executing on the field on a consistent basis. Now, the only reason I'm not, I have a couple of reasons I'm not overly concerned, but one of the many reasons I'm not overly concerned about seeing him kind of playing hero ball with limited opportunities and maybe trying to make the most of them and being reckless with the football is really because we've seen him not really turn the football over this season. Ever since the Jets game, where we had to bring up the conversation of him possibly being, having that fumbling issue, it wouldn't be the Jets game, it'd be the Rams game. Ever since that, we really haven't talked about Josh Allen fumbling the football as a ball carrier or in the pocket. We really haven't. It hasn't been a chronic issue like it has been throughout the first 2 seasons of his career as a runner or as a quarterback in the pocket. So not only that, he's also not throwing it to the other team all that often. He's also not turning the ball over on a consistent basis, on a weekly basis. This week it wasn't concerning to me. I'm not going to sit here and say that Josh Allen was rusty from the bye week. Now, is that certainly a conversation we could have, whether or not a hot offense that typically gets off to a hot start, that was on a roll 12 weeks in a row, that they took a week off and then they looked kind of shaky to start this game? Is that something we can talk about? Absolutely. But I'm not going to complain about Josh Allen in a game that he completed 75% of his passes and he did the things necessary to win. If you're playing a team that isn't the Los Angeles Chargers, do I think you come away with a win? I can't say for sure, but you're playing the Los Angeles Chargers and it was good enough to beat that football team on that given week.
Yeah, all quarterbacks are going to have bad halves. Almost all NFL quarterbacks are going to have bad halves. Josh Allen had a bad second half. For people who are watching this live, how many people watched Monday Night Football last night? Russell Wilson did not look great in the first half, especially the first quarter. They couldn't really get anything going. I mean, he didn't have the turnovers like Allen had, but my point is that all quarterbacks are going to have bad halves, and it comes down to offensive versus defensive game plans as much as it does execution. And the fact that we are saying that 18 for 24, a game where Allen really wasn't asked to do too much, is a poor game for Josh Allen. I understand the 2 turnovers are not what you want, but 18 for 24 and 1 passing touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown is a poor game, just like Justin Pletnikoff said. That does speak to how good Josh has been this year. I mean, last year we would be saying this was an average game for Josh, would we not? Because he hadn't thrown for 300 yards in a single game going into this season, let alone 400, which I believe he's done twice. He hadn't shown us that. He hasn't shown us what his ceiling is. And so now when he plays like this maybe being an average game for Josh Allen in his first 2 years in the league, it kind of stands out and say, there's something wrong with him. But I really just want to double down on, you take away the second half and it's a good game from Josh. I mean, the Bills were really moving the football in the first half. They were pulling everything out. I mean, they had the rushing game going with both backs. Allen was slinging around, and Stephon Diggs didn't even catch a ball in the first half yesterday, and they moved the ball. He didn't even catch the ball. You had a passing touchdown from Cole Beasley. That's a great play. And Brian Daboll has shown us he's got a ton of those stupid plays that he pulls out at perfect times. I think of the passing touchdown to Josh Allen on Thanksgiving last year against the Cowboys. That's what made me, that's what I thought of when Cole Beasley threw that ball. That's what I thought of. What's that?
That was the playoff game. The one on Thanksgiving. There's been so many calls.
What did they do on? What was the?
It was Andre Roberts on the end around to Devin Singletary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways,
it was close.
So my point exactly. Brian Daboll has a bunch of these plays that he pulls out at perfect time. That was another example of it. It's really encouraging if you have the NFL's leading receiver, one of the best receivers in the NFL, doesn't touch the ball in the first half, and you score that many points and you move the ball that well. And then you come out in the second half. And I mean, I really want to talk about the Buffalo defense. They really showed me a lot this week. I know that we've been saying for a few weeks that they've been better. They've been forcing turnovers. They gave up 34 against Seattle, 32 against Arizona, but they were better. This week, they were good. I think this was the first game this season that the Bills defense was good, and it showed us what it can be. Not just getting timely turnovers, but also just putting an absolute stop to the momentum that the opposing offense had. And they really did that in the fourth quarter, It started with the first play in the fourth quarter, 4th and 1. They get a huge stop. The Chargers should have kicked the field goal there, but they didn't. Buffalo gets a stop. Ellie comes away with no points. Then Singletary fumbles the ball at his own 40-yard line. The Chargers get down into the red zone, and A.J. Klein makes a great tackle for a loss on 3rd down, holding the Chargers to a field goal. Then you have the Allen fumble. Bills defense holds. Then you have the interception. Bills defense holds with the Trey Wayne interception. At any point over those 10 minutes, it could have been so easy for the Chargers to come down and score. They had all of the momentum, but the Bills defense continued to hold, and that's what won them the game, was that 10 minutes to start the fourth quarter. It really is what won Buffalo the game, because offense had nothing. 3 turnovers in 7 plays is an absolute disaster for an offense, and the Bills defense really made up for it.
Yeah, that's a collapse. That is an utter collapse for an offense. That could go from bad to ugly really quick. 3 turnovers in 7 plays. And you talk about this defense playing like that, coming back from 3 turnovers in a matter of 7 plays from their own offense. Is that something you think they were capable of prior to this game? If I told you going into this game that in the second half, the Bills defense or the Bills offense will turn the ball over three times in a matter of 7 plays, and the Bills defense won't even allow a single point. Would you have believed me?
Absolutely not. I mean, yeah, you look at it, the Bills defense that we saw the first half of the season. If you'd have told me the Bills are turning the ball over in 3 times in 7 plays, I'm saying, well, they're giving up 17 points at least, maybe 21 points.
Right.
That's 20-point swing right there. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
But it was so impressive. And it was the defense as a unit. It wasn't just one portion. I mean, the linebackers made, AJ Klein made the nice play, and then Trey White gets the pick on a nice read and zone coverage. It was everybody together, and that was really uplifting for Bills fans because I said after the game on Sunday, Bills defense is playing like this in the playoffs. They could beat anybody. They could beat the Chiefs if they're playing this well. If Josh Allen is having a good game, they can beat anybody because the thing that was missing from this team was the defense that the Bills had last year. Now, I'm not saying that after one game, Buffalo's defense is magically fixed and all of the problems we've been talking about for 3 months have gone away. But if they play like they did against the Chargers, a deep playoff run is in store.
Well, the sky isn't even a limit if this defense can kind of look like they did against the Chargers. Let's not act like this was no offense to sneeze at either. The Chargers were a good offense, not necessarily in the second half as much as in the first half this season, but they were still overall a good offense and potent with Justin Herbert at quarterback, and then Keenan Allen on the outside, Hunter Henry and Mike Williams, all these players that were held quiet. And I said on the Overtime podcast last week with uncertainty as to whether or not Austin Ekeler played in this game, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. On Tuesday, was it Tuesday or one of the day, whatever day we talked about the game, the last time we went live with the Overtime podcast, I said if Austin Ekeler were activated in this game, that it'd be problematic with the combination of he and Hunter Henry. And that simply just didn't come to fruition. This Chargers offense, Austin Ekeler was kept in check. Even with A.J. Klein is still in the game. And let's talk about A.J. Klein. 14 tackles, a sack and a half, 2 quarterback hits. I think 3 tackles for a loss. A.J. Klein, you said it to me as soon as this game was over. And I asked you why, not in a snarky way, but I wanted to know why. So I guess you can tell me right here because you did not answer my question with elaboration. And you just had a hell of a game. So A.J. Klein, with his career day as a Bill, in this game. I'll touch on my thoughts in a second, but I just want to know real quick why AJ Klein is your stud of the week.
AJ Klein is my stud. He had a great game. I texted you not even 5 minutes after the game. I was out the door, headed to my girlfriend's house, and I texted you before I left saying AJ Klein is my stud. And my response was he had a great game because I didn't have the chance to pull up his statistics at that moment. Since then, I have AJ Klein, 14 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for a loss, 1.5 sacks. And he continues to find success blitzing the quarterback and getting into the backfield. I think that Leslie Frazier has found a nice role for AJ Klein in his defense, and it's made a difference. He wasn't good earlier in the season. AJ Klein wasn't. He was not good when he was first given a large role in this defense in the absence of Matt Milano. But I think Leslie Frazier should get some credit for figuring out where AJ Klein can fit in here and play to his strengths. And Klein himself needs to get credit because he's played significantly better, and he is part of the reason why this Bills defense is starting to turn the corner despite the injury to Milano and despite all the other things that have been wrong with the Bills defense this year. He's made a nice impact the last few weeks, and I think he can be a real valuable player in the middle of this defense down the stretch.
Yeah, you've seen this Bills defense, and this goes in part as to I wouldn't call it a transformation, but the real turnaround for AJ Klein this season. Because I see this little apology form flying around Twitter. I'm not signing that. AJ Klein was booty cheeks the first half of the season. He was so bad. I am not signing anything to apologize, but I will say that AJ Klein has made a huge turnaround this season. And I think part of that is due to the fact that this Bills defense, it feels like they've kind of changed their identity, hasn't it? It really does, because this is a Bills defense that in the past it was predicated on bend but don't break, be opportunistic when the other team force them into mistakes, and be opportunistic when the ball comes your way or if you're able to create a turnover. Now, this is a defense that has a far more aggressive approach. They're seventh in the league in blitz percentage. And that's something I didn't really envision myself saying this year. I didn't think the Bills were going to blitz as much as they do. And that was a point of criticism I had of them going into the bye, that was something that I gave credit to Leslie Frazier, to the fact that he recognized that right before the bye in the games against the Seattle Seahawks and the Cardinals. Because let's be honest, this is the third straight game that we've been able to say that the Bills defense was okay. And I agree with you, Jeff. Like you said earlier in the show, this was their best showing and best outing as an entire unit. And a lot of that has to do with A.J. Klein. It really does. Because earlier in the season, we saw A.J. Klein and his limitations, specifically when having to drop back into coverage, covering a tight end, covering a running back, what have you. The guy is simply, he's a veteran in this league. This is a young man's league, like Vontae Davis once said. I understand that I need to stop doing that. That's 2 weeks in a row I brought up Vontae Davis. This is the last. But it is a young man's league, and A.J. Klein simply does not have the athleticism anymore to keep up with these tight ends and running backs. Simply the best utilization of A.J. Klein is not dropping him back into coverage. And that's what Leslie Frazier has adjusted to. You see A.J. Klein being used far more as a situational blitzer in aggressive packages, almost taking that role of Lorenzo Alexander had last season, if you can compare it to that. Maybe not as much as on special teams, but you're seeing him come off as a blitzer. He's an aggressive football player. That one play that he made chasing down Eckler, I mean, there was one where he had him squared up like 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and that was kind of meh. But with that,
he prevented the big play there.
He did.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
It
was like a 2-yard gain, whatever.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. I can't say one bad thing about A.J. Klein.
You can. I like Gary's comment. Sorry to cut you off, but I like Gary's comment here. When Milano comes back, will be very good. Milano best at blitzing coverage. Yeah, I think that Leslie Frazier was trying to use A.J. Klein in Matt Milano's role, and it wasn't working. You said that with having him in pass coverage. Matt Milano is a very good pass defender, covering tight ends and backs, and as well as in the running game. And I don't want people to think that A.J. Klein is going to come in and take Milano's snaps, take the role that Milano will be having when he's back and healthy, because that's not what's going to happen. Matt Milano is clearly still the better player, as well as A.J. Klein's played. I mean, Matt Milano is a tremendous linebacker, but the two can complement each other well. And now that they have the Bills have found what the role for each of them can be, they can use them accordingly. It's like what I've talked about when the Bills are healthy at cornerback and they have a few guys who are adequate and can play those snaps. You can do the same with a linebacker, because these guys, they're two different players, Milano and A.J. Klein, and they have different strengths and they have different weaknesses. And when Milano comes back, having a guy like A.J. Klein who can bring in with different packages and blitz him and get him in the backfield, it's going to be very advantageous to you. Whereas, if Klein hadn't made this turnaround in the last few weeks, and then you bring Milano back, you might not even have Klein on the field that much, because you don't see his value, because they were trying to use him in Milano, like to be a Matt Milano, and Matt Milano isn't on the field. But now that we see A.J. Klein's value and we see what he can contribute to the defense, when Milano comes back, Leslie Frazier will know how to use him. And that's really important.
And my goodness, when you get Matt Milano back in there, you now have three linebackers that, they're all good at the role that you're going to ask them to do. And, just like Mike Nealon said in the comments, and he's right, they flipped Klein to strong side linebacker. They had him at weak side with a lot of coverage dropbacks, and he's just not that guy. Milano comes back off IR. We will have Klein on the other end. He's right. They did switch him to Sam linebacker, and that does have a part in why you're seeing him succeed, because he is far more fit in that role rather than the weak side, and he is not going to be that good of a player when he's having to drop back into coverage. And now you're seeing him being used to his strengths, and you're seeing this defense kind of take an entire turnaround. And it's come to a peak this week against the Chargers. And I can't credit A.J. Klein for having a good game without also crediting Tremaine Edmunds with another good game. We talked about it. I think this is probably one of the most harsh podcasts in Bills podcasting on Tremaine Edmunds, because Jeff and I were extremely harsh on Tremaine Edmunds to start this season. With that AC joint sprain and what have you, he just wasn't the same player we saw. But another strong performance for Tremaine Edmunds. And, I I'm not going to say I feel bad or take back what I said, but it is definitely promising to see him recuperate in the season like this in his third year where, this is a big deal. That would have been a big deal if Tremaine Edmunds had a really bad season. He looked the way he did the first half of the season, the whole season, and being able to turn it around halfway, the same time that AJ Klein did, at the same time that evidently the defensive line did. Because let's talk about that for a second. I thought this defensive line had one of their best outings of the season. And we talked about how this is a collective performance for the Bills defense, and the defensive line cannot be left out of that discussion. We saw Ed Oliver making plays. Ed Oliver's been making plays all season. He just hasn't been filling the stat sheet. You got to watch the film if you want to see Ed Oliver and how much he wreaks havoc on the offensive line, on opposing offensive lines, and also how he's been used has been kind of murky while missing that big body defensive tackle along the interior. And we also saw A.J. Epinesa making plays. We saw A.J. Epinesa take over for Trent Murphy as Trent Murphy was inactivated. And we saw Jerry Hughes get home to the quarterback. This was a complete football game for this Bills defense. And this was a game for the Bills defense that I felt like we all needed to see. And seeing it coming out of the bye week on the final stretch of games before you make your playoff push, that's extremely, extremely promising.
Yeah, earlier in the season when Tremaine Edmunds wasn't playing well, a lot of people said that it was because he was injured, whereas I said it was because I just didn't think that he was getting any better. And I was wrong. I think his struggles can be attributed to his injury because he's played better. And the Bills linebacking core as a whole, I think that they've finally gotten settled this year. I don't know if the lack of preseason or whatever there was, it slowed that process down of them getting new faces in and getting accustomed to their roles. You get new players and old players out. But I think that they finally kind of all figured out where that linebacking core fits in well. Bringing AJ Klein to play the Sam backer, it's advantageous to him. He's gotten significantly better, and they've been able to use him in a more advantageous way, I should say. And I think that the same thing could be said maybe for the Bills defensive line. They rotate a lot of guys in and out of there. And, they've held their own the last few weeks. They've gotten to the point where we're not complaining about them anymore. I think that that's a compliment for football players when people like us, podcasters, analysts, reporters, when nobody's complaining about you, you're doing something right. You can say that about Ed Oliver. You can say that about AJ Epinesa. And I think the Bills defensive line as a whole, we're not saying, why aren't they getting to the quarterback? Why aren't they stopping the run? We're not hammering those things home. And I think that that is a big testament to the improvement that they've made the last few weeks.
And I'm going to get into not a question, but a question I was reminded of that I wanted to talk about on this podcast before we stop talking about the defense. But Keenan Allen was kind of held quiet in this game. 4 catches for 40 yards. He had a lot of drops. Keenan Allen looked a little uncomfortable there in the Buffalo quote-unquote cold. And, there's a big difference between Buffalo cold when it's 48 degrees one of the last couple of days of November, and we're calling it Buffalo cold. It's still cold to guys from California, and Keenan Allen did go to Cal, so he's a California guy, and he doesn't like the cold. And I found it just interesting how, the Bills secondary did have a good game, and I talked about how a big part of this game was the fact that they did have all of their defensive backs coming in for the first time this season. It really kind of opened the door for them to do whatever they wanted in the secondary and be able to play free and play with all the versatility that they'd want in an ideal game. And, it was evident. Justin Herbert did go over 300 yards, but a lot of those I felt like were garbage stats. But it was overall a solid day for the Bills defense. And this is something I really wanted to talk about because Richard Greenwood says, seems like Frazier hinted that Milano will be back this week in his presser. And he's right. Leslie Frazier did hit at Matt Milano coming back this week in his press conference. But that leads me to ask you, Jeff, do you think the Bills should be more patient with Matt Milano coming back now that we've seen AJ Klein play at the caliber of play that we've seen him play? Or should we, obviously we're not going to rush Matt Milano back regardless, or do you think they should bring Matt Milano back when he's ready, neither rush or quote unquote, take your time with it?
So the thing that's more important to me than how quickly he comes back is the role that you're putting him in. I want to see Matt Milano put in if he's coming back, I want to see him put in the exact role that he would be playing for last season, for example, or when he's completely healthy. I don't think you should rush him back because we know that him being healthy in January is the most important thing for him. But I don't want him to come back and you bring him in a limited role and you have, you have him playing a different snaps than he would be completely healthy. So I guess what I should say is when Matt Milano comes back, I want him taking on all of the responsibilities that he would be taking on normally if he was not injured. I don't think that AJ Klein should be, quote unquote, making up for what Matt Milano can't do because of a previous injury. AJ Klein has showed us he's a valuable player in this defense, but I don't think that he's ready, and I don't think he'll ever be the player that's going to play the role that Matt Milano can play when he is completely healthy. I think that the two can complement each other very well. And when the two of them are playing in the games together on that unit, it's going to look good. It's going to look good, especially with Edmonds in the middle of the two of them. I don't think they should rush him back though, because you need him to come in and play that complete role. You shouldn't rush Milano back and expect AJ Klein to be able to make up for what is being lost because you want to be hesitant with Milano. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm along the same lines, the same thought process as you. I don't want to see them rush Matt Milano back, and I don't want to see them take their time either. But what I do want to see, and I agree with you with this, is I want to see a 100% ready Matt Milano. That's all I want to see. I want to see a guy who's ready to go out there and cover Travis Kelce. That's what I want to see. I want to see a guy who's prepared to take 100% of the snaps in a game like he was before he was injured. And I'm not going to say he's taking all the snaps away from AJ Klein or what have you. We'll talk about what the Bills defense can and might do when they have all three of their linebackers readily available. But right now at this moment, if I were to give you an answer, if Matt Milano is 100% and he is ready, he should play. He should. But if Matt Milano is 90%, 95%, no, it's simply not worth it. I'm not saying take your time. I'm saying bring Matt Milano back when Matt Milano was ready to come back. But AJ Klein, he is a good football player, but he's not Matt Milano. Like you said, Jeff, they are different players that will play different roles, that will have different responsibilities on this defense entirely. They're not, it's more of a yin and yang than it is a copy and paste. That's what it is. Richard Greenwood says nobody's 100% this time of year. You're 100%. Yeah, you're right. You are right. But Matt Milano has an opportunity right now, because who do you really play that you need Matt Milano against? Really, going forward. I mean, you could argue the Dolphins because they have Mike Gesicki. That's the only real team that has an efficient tight end. You could say that the Broncos because they have Noah Fant, but I'm not rushing Matt Milano back to play a 3-7 football team. That's kind of where I sit with Matt Milano. When he comes back, I want to see him ready to play at least 7 more games, and that includes the Super Bowl. Matt Milano should be ready to go for a Super Bowl run. I don't want to see him, coming out and playing a limited role like we saw when he kind of came back before they put him on IR. But, this was a solid football game. This was a solid football game for the Buffalo Bills, and we've talked about it a lot. But we also have to talk about their Week 13 opponent as they go to Arizona to play the 49ers. And that's a whole weird situation in itself. And that's definitely, I was reading up on it today, it's definitely going to affect these 49ers players and their psyches. And they're human beings, guys. They're human beings. And, they pretty much just had, I wouldn't say their livelihoods uprooted, but where they go to work every day, it's going to change from one place to another state. Like, it's a big change. And having a Monday Night Football game this week for the 49ers could be, I wouldn't say advantageous, but it helps the situation a tad. But this team has been decimated by injuries. And I have my concerns and how they match up against the Bills. But, Jeff, what are your overall thoughts on this 49ers team that are Super Bowl that had a Super Bowl hangover this season, but you can't really say that they did completely because they've been just beaten down by injuries. 13 players on injured reserve right now.
Mhm. I don't mind the situation at all for Buffalo. The Bills are going back to a stadium and a locker room that they were just in just over 2 weeks ago. You're going to have to make the cross-country trip anyways. Now you get to play in what's essentially a neutral stadium. And I don't know if they're going to allow fans in this or not, but if they are, this could be the most Bills fans we see at a game this season, because how many, I don't know what San Francisco's fan presence is in the Valley, but I'm assuming that the Bills have just as many. And if you're letting people into this game, this could be a pretty Bills heavy crowd potentially. Looking at the San Francisco roster, it's interesting because we know they've had a lot of moving parts this season with the injuries. This is a team that has gone through the gauntlet lately. They played Seattle, Green Bay, New Orleans, and the Rams in their last 4. That is a tough month, especially when you don't have your franchise quarterback, when you have so many guys getting hurt, and then having to plug guys in and then bringing guys back. They got a big win over the Rams to snap a 3-game losing streak that gave them some momentum. And now they're facing some adversity with the stadium situation. Will that become a distraction, or will it become something they can rally behind? I'm really not sure. I think that the former will be the case. It's just such a distraction. I mean, now those guys have all got to call their wives or girlfriends, call whoever, their family, and say, hey, we're going to be in Arizona for the next month. We got to uproot, and we're going to a different state that's 1,000 miles away. And it seems like it would be a distraction. I don't know how that's going to impact this team. Like I said, they got a big win this week and to build some momentum. And I'm sure that they're using that as a rallying cry going forward, us against the world. Let's do this. But I'm not really sure how it's going to impact them, but I don't think that this is a bad situation for the Bills to be in, especially because there's people in the stadium. There's people that are going to be rooting for you in the stadium. That's underrated. I mean, you watch the Bills games, it's got to be weird having nobody in the stadium. I get the crowd noise and everything, and it looks good on TV because you can't really see the stands anyways, and they pump in the crowd noise, so it sounds like there's people there. But I don't know. I think that this is almost, I wouldn't say it's a favorable situation for the Bills, but it's a lot better than going to Santa Clara and playing in front of nobody, and San Francisco not having to make that plane ride either.
Man, the county officials really kind of kicked them in the nuts there, didn't they? Imagine if that happened here. Like that. Oh my goodness. I couldn't even imagine what would happen if that happened here. Wow. I'm not.
I mean, hey, knock on wood. Knock
on wood is right.
Erie County's an orange zone.
Yeah,
whatever they call it.
I'm not going to say his name, but he might be getting some ideas seeing what they did with Santa Clara. And it might be bad that the Bills just so happen to be playing them this week, but that's just a joke. But if anything, I think this situation bodes well for the Bills. You're right. This is a distraction for a football team. And while we can sit here and say, oh, well, they might band together, they might rally together. And I just want to remind everybody, this isn't a typical football team going from one place to another situation where, oh, they're eating dinner together, oh, they're hanging out together, they're playing video games together, whatever these players do in their free times when they're not caught up with meetings and what have you as a team. Whatever these players do with one another to bond, if you will. They don't hang out, guys. This is pretty much a go to practice and go back to your hotel room, and I'll see you on Zoom in the morning. Like, that's pretty much what their days consist of. And they're going to be living out of a hotel, and they're transporting all of their player personnel. So that means their entire training staff, everybody, every 49er-related person is going to be going to Arizona and having to uproot where they go to work to a completely different state. And I'm not sure, like you said, I'm not sure what the 49er following is like in Death Valley, but what I do know is that's Cardinal territory, and those are two divisional rivals. So it might be a situation like we saw in Miami, where Miami was allowing fans and the Bills fans bought all the tickets. That very well could be a situation at hand. But as a football team, without this whole COVID situation surrounding them and them having to go ahead and play in Arizona at State Farm Stadium, this is a football team that obviously hasn't had a season that they'd like to I wouldn't say that they'd like to remember, but they'd like to forget it with all the injuries that have rattled this team, such as, starting quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo and star franchise defensive end pass rusher Nick Bosa. those are two huge losses to this football team. Right now, they're starting Nick Mullins at quarterback, which, I mean, they've kind of gotten by, but to say the least, CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins have kind of just been taking time trading this job. Sometimes one guy looks awful, the other guy looks awful. Obviously, Nick Mullins looked pretty good last week in their win against divisional opponent, the Los Angeles Rams. And I think a lot of that is due in part to the return of wide receiver Deebo Samuel. And Deebo Samuel, he's one of my favorite players in the league. He was one of my favorite players coming out of the draft a couple of years ago. This guy is explosive. This guy is a true athlete. You see him get the ball in his hands, he's going for a touchdown. Like, that's what he's trying to do. And he's a player with explosion. He's a player with agility. He's a player with power. He is just the full package. And I understand, he's not a DK Metcalf. He's not 6'3" running a 4.2, but this guy is nothing to sneeze at. And he has had, I wouldn't say an injury-riddled season, but he just returned from a hamstring issue that did plague him for a majority of the year, and I wasn't happy about that because he's on my fantasy team. But he had an hamstring issue that plagued him for a majority of the year, and he's coming back. And last week, he had an 11 reception outing with over 100 yards receiving. If it's anybody in the 49ers passing attack with George Kittle out and Brandon Ayuk just coming back from the COVID reserve list, that's also important to know. I wouldn't say they're the same player, but they're both really good athletes with the football in the hand. Point being, Deebo Samuel is the most important player in the 49ers passing attack to watch out for this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be another big matchup for the Bills secondary, and I would just say Trey White, but we know that Trey White doesn't follow people across the field, and I'm not afraid of this San Francisco offense with Mullins as the quarterback. I mean, I just can't be. I think that looking from Bills defensive standpoint, you got to look at what's worked the last couple of games and build off of that. Now, what has worked? Let's talk about what's worked for the Bills defense. What's made it better? Getting pressure on the quarterback by blitzing your linebackers. I'm going to keep saying it because it continues to work. Leslie Frazier needs to continue to find creative ways to do that. Put pressure on Nick Mullins early and often. That has continued to work. Also, slow down the running game. Ed Oliver has been eating up a ton of blocks lately. You have those big guys in the middle, help out your linebackers, and be able to slow down the running game. You do those two things. I think those are the two big differences, the two improvements that the Bills have made the last couple of weeks. Continue to do those things against this San Francisco offense, and all you got to do is give Josh Allen a chance. I mean, that's really what it's come down to with how well he's played this year. Now, Clayton, I've been wanting to get this in the whole show. I haven't had an opportunity to do so. Coming into this season, we all knew Josh Allen was the X factor of this team, as NFL quarterbacks oftentimes are. We knew that, and he's shown that he is that. He's played so well this year that he's outdone the bad defense. Last week he played poorly, but the defense was good. Complementary football, as Sean McDermott loves to say, and everybody loves to use that term, complementary football. Do that again this week. Give Josh Allen a chance, keep him on the field, and you got a chance to win any game you play.
Yeah. With this team, going back to Deebo Samuel just for a second, my main concern wouldn't necessarily be him as a wide receiver one. If Trey White matches up with Deebo Samuel, it's going to be a matchup, but it's going to be a matchup similar to that of Keenan Allen. It's not one of those, well, I think this one's 50-50. And if I said that going into the Cardinals game where he's playing one of the three best receivers in football, and that of DeAndre Hopkins. But Deebo Samuel, he's not on that level just yet. I'm not going to say he's on the same level as Keenan Allen, but it's a challenge for Trey White. It'll be a challenge. I'm not going to say that Trey White is worlds better. I will say Trey White is a better corner than Deebo Samuel is a receiver right now. That I can definitively say. But my main concern with Deebo Samuel in this offense is they do oftentimes like to move Deebo around. As like I said, he's an explosive football player. He's also a versatile football player. He can beat you from the boundary and he can beat you from the slot. And I'm not going to Teron Johnson has not had an incredible season this far. He hasn't. He's had a pretty bad season. He's had a few okay games. He hasn't looked, the way he did at the beginning of the season, like we were talking about earlier with AJ Klein, where he just looked abysmal and he was a liability throughout no matter what down it was. But that's my main concern regarding Deebo Samuel, is them moving around. Similarly to that of my main concern with Keenan Allen, is can the Bills stop him if they move him inside? Can the Bills stop him? I'm not necessarily worried about the boundary as much as I am when they move these receivers to the inside. And the same can be said about fellow wide receiver Brandon Ayuk. But probably my biggest concern, and this goes to kind of what Jeff was saying, I'm not really worried about Nick Mullins dicing up this Bills defense. Should I be? Probably more than I am, but I'm pretty confident that he's not going to, considering this Bills defense is rolling. And when a defense gets confidence, they start playing it fast, physical, and aggressive. And when defenses, that's a dangerous combination, is having a confident defense. And with the talent that this defense has, it'll be interesting for this Bills team, to say the least. But the main concern I have for the defense this week is the 49ers rushing attack led by Raheem Mostert, who he did fumble the ball last week. It was forced out by Aaron Donald, and it led to a touchdown. But Raheem Mostert, I mean, he's a dynamic football player with the ball in his hands. He really is. And this offensive line featuring Trent Williams, this offensive line, they're pretty good. That's what the 49ers like to do. That's when they're in their comfort zone, is running the football with Raheem Mostert. They also have Jerick McKinnon, who is not returning from an injury, but he's just finally getting over it to its entirety. He's finally getting over his injury completely. So Jerick McKinnon's fresh. They don't have Tevin Coleman, but they do have Raheem Mostert and Jerick McKinnon. And I think having those two backs, that could prove to be really kind of the X factor of this game, is can the Bills stop the 49ers rushing attack? Can the Bills defense get off the field in a timely fashion? That's what I understand. It might kind of sound cliche or what have you, but in my opinion, this game comes down to whether or not the Bills defense can stop the 49ers rushing attack, and whether or not they can efficiently get off on third downs. Because what I envision this 49ers offense trying to do to this Bills defense is wear them out. Because when you see this Bills defense get wore out, when you see teams rushing for 3, 4, just pounding the rock on the Bills defense, that's really when you start getting them gassed. And that's when you start seeing players like a Deebo Samuel, like a Brandon Ayuk. That's when you start seeing those players being utilized in far more efficient fashions, because the opposing defense is wore out, and they're just simply not able to keep up with athletic, explosive receivers such as Ayuk and Samuel. So to me, the ultimate key to victory for the Bills defense is stopping that rushing attack and getting off on third down.
And this is where your run stoppers come into play for Buffalo. I mean, AJ Klein, we've talked about him a lot this show. He can be a difference maker getting in the backfield. If they blitz him, he's shown that he can get in the backfield and beat up and break down rushing plays just as much as he can pressure the quarterback on passing plays. Same with Tremaine Edmonds. I mean, Ed Oliver, like I just said, he's been eating up blocks left and right. I mean, you got a bunch of guys in there in the middle who are eating up double teams. Get space open for Tremaine Edmonds, because I complained about Tremaine Edmonds earlier in the year about filling those holes and not being able to make the tackles. Well, he has shored that up the last few weeks, the last month. And if you get in those situations, then I think you're going to have some success. I think that the 49ers know that the Bills have had trouble slowing down rushing attacks this year. They're going to watch tape of the Chiefs game and see how the Chiefs picked apart the Buffalo defense there in a game where the weather was bad. Obviously, weather not being a factor this week inside, but I think that the Niners are going to look at some film of games like that and see this is how we can beat this team, and they're going to throw a bunch of different looks at them, and Buffalo's going to have to find a way to overcome that. And I think if you can hold them under, I talk about that 5 yards per carry that I want the Bills to have. Well, make sure that your opponent doesn't get that. Chargers had 3.2 yards per carry on the ground. That number is at 4 or below, you're going to win the game for the opposing team.
Okay. All right. 4 yards per carry or under, the Bills win. I like that. That's fair. But I'm really interested to see what the Bills offense can do on the ground against this defense, because while that defensive front for the 49ers is talented, featuring players like Eric Armstead and Kerry Hyde Jr. and Javon Kinlaw, that front is still beat up in itself as well. That they're missing Nick Bosa, like I touched on earlier. They also have Fred Warner. And Fred Warner, this guy, I'm not going to say he's the best linebacker in football, but I wouldn't be mad if he were on my team. I know that. Fred Warner is everything you would want in a modern NFL linebacker. And this defensive front combined with the athletic linebacker they have manning the middle who can fly sideline to sideline is what makes them an opportunistic defense. That's what makes them, a high floor defense, if you will. You talk about players like Fred Warner, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, and Kerry Hyde. This is a defense, they've been decimated by injuries. They just lost another, and Jamar Taylor, their corner, who tore his ACL this past week against the Rams. This is a defense that, while beat up, they've managed to find a way to make plays when they need to make plays. I wouldn't say similar to that of the Bills, because I feel like the Bills defense makes more plays than the 49ers. But I think the biggest factor in making plays, and probably the matchup in this whole game, forget the game, all Sunday, that I'm looking forward to the most is Richard Sherman versus Stephon Diggs. And Richard Sherman, I don't even care how old he is, because guess what? Richard Sherman's still one of the best corners in football. He just had his 40th career interception. This guy can still cover in man coverage like he is 25 years old. Richard Sherman is a damn good corner. He is a really good corner. And when you talk about, I understand he's towards the twilight of his career. He's towards the end of his career. But, that speaks volumes to Richard Sherman's ability to, have longevity in this league. Because a lot of people can be man corners. I mean, where's Brandon Browner? Where's his counterpart from that Legion of Boom defense? He's not in the league anymore. He bounced around to two different teams, and he's gone. So Richard Sherman, who is a man corner primarily, and I can't wait to see these two match up, because when you talk about a man separating wide receiver like Stephon Diggs, he's one of the best in the league at separating from man coverage. And I feel like this season more so, well, obviously more so than last year, but I feel like this season, every single week we talk about, not every single week, but every couple of weeks we talk about Stephon Diggs being matched up with a top-notch corner like a Patrick Peterson, like a Richard Sherman, like a Stephon Gilmore. There are a lot of talented corners in this league, and it just reinforces the fact that adding a player like Stephon Diggs really kind of revitalizes your offenses, changes the complexion of your offense. As now we talk about these matchups with Richard Sherman and Stephon Diggs is, well, this is going to be a fun one to watch. Whereas if it were Richard Sherman versus John Brown, I think we all know who kind of has the advantage in that dogfight. But going up against this 49ers defense, it's going to be a challenge, but the Bills are going to have their opportunities. And I feel like I say that every single week, and they have yet to give me a reason not to, because they make their own opportunities. Brian Daboll, I'm not going to say he didn't call his best game of his career the other day, but he did call a damn good game. And he has been a good offensive coordinator, and he has found the weaknesses in this offense, and he changed them for the better against the Chargers. Now, am I saying you walk into State Farm Stadium and you have the same game plan you did against the Chargers? Absolutely not. Every team is different, every matchup is different, and that's really what it comes down to when composing a game plan. But when you attack the 49ers, I'm not really going to give what I think their approach is going to be, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can do against this 49ers front, because they are a big front. Eric Armstead being, he was a defensive tackle when he was drafted in this league. They did have a 3-4 defense back when he was drafted, but now he's playing a defensive end role, being that big in a 4-3. It's kind of unique in what they do. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this Bills offensive line combats a bigger defensive line, and if it'd be far more advantageous to have Josh Allen dropping back 40 times in this game to kind of wear out these big defensive ends and get them using all of their energy. And I'm not really worried about Eric Armstead coming off of the edge, but I am worried about Kerry Hyde, who does have 7.5 sacks this season. I'm really looking forward to seeing what Brian Daboll thinks would be the most advantageous in attacking this 49ers defense.
Yeah, I think the passing game is very important for Buffalo this week. I want to see Brian Daboll get Josh Allen back on track. Allen has had letdown games this year. I mean, the Chargers game was just his third lowest total passing yards of the season with 157, but he hasn't had back-to-back games this season in which he's thrown for 250 or less yards in each game. So get him back on track this week, and I think that you're going to have some success. I really think that Josh can have a bounce-back game playing indoors. He played well at Arizona last time, and build some momentum. I mean, I don't want to overlook the 49ers because they're a great team, but build some momentum going into that Steelers game that's looming on Sunday night in a couple of weeks. Do that. And I think that you really need to attack the 49ers through the air. Show the league on Monday night what the identity of this Buffalo Bills offense is, because the identity is Josh Allen throwing that ball all over the field, throwing it to Stephon Diggs, throwing it to Cole Beasley. Josh Allen escaping pressure and running for first downs. Don't be shy throwing the ball through the air just because Allen had a disappointing and maybe a discouraging second half against the Chargers. Get right back to business and throw the ball all over the 49ers. And I think that he can do it.
Honestly, and you kind of alluded to it, and I was just about to say it. And sometimes I think you're reading my mind because I was just about to say it. This is the Josh Allen showcase game. We might have thought it was the supposed to be Thursday night game against the Chiefs that got all mangled into being an evening game. I wasn't going to say it was going to be the Titans game. We thought it could have been when he had to play the Patriots, but the Patriots were one of the worst defenses or they still are one of the worst defenses in the league against the run. Obviously, be a little more. It's a good time to run the ball against a bad run defense. Excuse me. But this is the Josh Allen showcase game, playing against a beat up secondary for that of the 49ers, playing in a dome. I don't think he's not going to have John Brown back this week, which obviously isn't ideal for a Josh Allen showcase game. But what that could mean is it's an opportunity for a player like Gabriel Davis to shine in a spotlight where he could be utilized more often. Or more importantly, how about Cole Beasley and Stephon Diggs? I'm not going to say like these two, quote unquote, aren't enough, but I really want to see Cole Beasley perform in a game in which John Brown doesn't play. I really want to see him come out and not necessarily be the main guy, but I want to see him and Stephon Diggs both working in rhythm, similar to that we saw Devin Singletary and Zach Moss both working in unison last week. I want to see both these guys playing off of one another, because while they do bring different things to this offense, they attack defenses in different ways and can be utilized at different periods of time. And that is something that I think could work to the Bills' advantage. I also think, like I said a minute ago, it could be a big game for Gabe Davis. It could be a big game for all three of these receivers. Would it be a hot take to say all three of them go over 100?
Hey, it could happen. It could
happen. And we don't do poll predictions on this podcast. We do that on the Saturday Night Tailgate, which will be airing on Sunday. So it'll be a Sunday Night Tailgate. It's kind of a floating name, if you will. But anyways, this is a Josh Allen showcase game on primetime Monday Night Football on ABC. My goodness, I was so happy to hear about that. ABC Monday Night Football.
I didn't even know that.
Both those games. For the Bills, for the Bills game against the 49ers and then the Patriots game as well. I think they're both on ABC. And that is I was more excited about that than anything. I was like, what? They're going on ABC? So this is some old school Monday Night Football. It's definitely exciting. And this is a huge matchup. The Bills, this is a game that, in my opinion, the Bills need to win. Not really because it's going to affect their playoff run or it's going to affect their standings to the effect that losing the Chargers would have, but because this is simply a team that you should beat, like the Chargers. This is a team that, I don't really care if it looks ugly. I don't think it's going to look ugly. I don't think you're going to have to beat. I don't think you're going to turn the ball over three times in 7 plays again this week. But at the end of the day, this is a football team that the Bills should beat. And I'm going to get to my prediction in a second. I think the Bills are going to win this game. Jeff, what do you feel?
I agree with you. Showcase game, showcase month here. Really, the Bills are on Monday Night Football here. They're scheduled to be on Sunday Night Football against the Steelers. I believe the Broncos game got flexed to Saturday. They're going to be in the spotlight the next month. So for the people who say, and they say it justifiably, they say it correctly, that the Bills don't get the national spotlight, they don't get the national attention. Here is their chance. Here's Josh Allen's chance to show everybody on ABC and this coming month what he can do. And I think the Bills are going to win too. I'm picking the Bills once again. He played well in Arizona last time. I get it's a completely different situation, but I think he's going to play well again. Would you like me to tell you my score?
Oh, yeah.
Bills scored 30 points last time they played at State Farm Stadium. They're going to score 30 points again. Bills win this game 30-16. I think that the Bills defense has another statement game, and people are going to be real excited if this game ends up 30-16, because that'll be a real impressive win for a Bills team against a solid 49ers team that has made the most of a season where, we talk about Super Bowl hangover. We talk about all the injuries they've had. They've made the most of their season. They've had a couple nice wins. They've had a couple bad losses, but they're a formidable opponent. And I think that a 30-16 two-score Bills win is going to be a big statement for this team, and it's going to be a fun week if that happens leading up to the showdown with the Steelers.
I just don't like it when we say like close to the same thing. Like I had it written down.
You got to start going first. You got to start going first because I always go first.
But I'm polite.
You are.
I try to be. I mean, some people on Twitter don't think I am, but that is what it is, I suppose. But no, I had written down the Bills were going to win this one 31-17. So 1 point more each way. So
we 2 missed extra points, and I get the bonus points in our competition.
Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. All right. But yeah, I do expect the Bills to win this game, and a variety of a 2-score victory. To the variety of a Josh Allen, I wouldn't say a coming out game. He's had plenty of coming out games this year. You could have called it. It's not a coming out game. I think everybody knows Josh Allen has a superstar development trait to those that know what that meaning in Madden now. So that's kind of a big deal because the Bills can be used in Madden on online franchise or not online franchise. Yeah, online franchise if you don't do the fantasy draft or whatever. But I think the Bills offense is going to have an efficient day. I think, like we talked about earlier, I think the linebackers are going to put pressure on the 49ers quarterback, on Nick Mullins, and it's going to lead to mistakes. And like I said earlier, the biggest key for the Bills defense is the ability to stop their rushing attack. And I agree with you, Jeff. I'm going to go in with you on saying if the Bills hold them to under 4 yards per carry, they'll win this game. And I'm not going to say that's ultimately what it comes down to. There's a lot of things that can make or break this game, but I think this is going to be an exciting game. I think this is a game that's going to excite a lot of Bills fans, that being on Monday Night Football. I mean, the last time the Bills were on Monday Night Football on an actual Monday night was I believe it was the Patriots game when Derek Anderson started, if I remember right. I think that was the last time. I think that was the last time they were on actual Monday Night Football.
And that doesn't count, does it?
Well, I mean, Thurman Thomas's number was retired that night, so it kind of does.
Yeah, but the Bills' performance, they weren't at full strength.
I mean, they weren't even at half strength. They didn't even have their backup quarterback. I think, was it Nate Peterman?
I don't know. I mean, when was the last time they're on Monday Night Football before that? The Seahawks game?
Oh, my God, stop. That Seahawks game where Sherman tackled Dan Carpenter?
Hate to bring it up.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, so the last 2 performances on Monday, yeah, so the Bills are due, to say the least. So to those of you that might be getting
concerned with Seahawks, were they on it in between that and the Cowboys game in 2007?
Oh, my God.
I'm taking you back there. We're not that old. I'm taking you back.
I'm not oh my godding and facepalming because it's hard to remember. It's the fact that I wish I didn't. I'm
taking you back to where I had my bedtime before the game was over for myself.
Well, a lot of people loved watching that game from 15 years ago on whatever channel it was during the pandemic when there was just as much football as any other year in March. So it was kind of weird. But anyways, the Bills are due for a good Monday Night Football performance, or they tend to suck. So I'm going to stick with my gut, and what my gut tells me is the Bills are going to win this one 31-17. Jeff, you said 30-16. We're almost spot on, and that, I don't know, that's just kind of weird. So, I mean, I think we're kind of the same Twitter handle now, even though it's underneath our names. It's a little different, but here we are at the end of the show. Go ahead and tell the people where they can find you, what they have to look forward to, and both your social media handles.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at RealJUVEINO, like I always say, giving some Bills takes on there. Also got some college basketball coverage coming up. St. Bonaventure, the Bonnies are scheduled to begin their season on December 12th, so we'll have all that stuff for you on my Twitter, and my Instagram is at my name, Jeff Uvino. If you kindly would like to check me out on there, I'd appreciate it.
You guys don't know this, but I've known Jeff since high school. He's done top-notch job on covering basketball since then. Because when you were in high school, I think you guys went to sectionals the same year my team did, and Caledonia did.
We played right before you.
Yeah, you did. I met you. I saw you before that.
Did we both lose? We lost.
Yeah, they both lost, I think. If I remember right. If I'm thinking of the right year, I think they both lost. Yeah. But Jeff does top-notch work covering basketball. So go ahead and follow him on Twitter at RealJUvino. And be sure to follow the Cold Front Report on Twitter, Instagram, and like us on Facebook. That's at Cold Front Report on Twitter, at Cold Front Report _ Bills News on Instagram, and the handle on Facebook has changed. It's Buffalo Bills Cold Front Report. If you'd like to find me on Twitter, it's at CFRCLAYTON. You can come over there and argue with me. I'll probably block you because I'm a wimp. You can also find me on Instagram at the same exact handle, at CFR Clayton. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy. And this has been the Overtime Podcast presented by the Cold Front Report.